Practice beats natural brilliance when natural brilliance doesn't practice. There was a time when magic was kind. That was before it all collapsed into 1,000,000 decibels. A timid process. Your mind must not be dilute for the charm to be wound. Though the day calls the castle clamour, there is silence in the spire. A chamber in peaceful serenity, a circle of solidarity, focusing the mind in its halo decked in books and scrolls of ancient chants and rituals still performed to this day. There is art in the production of magic, like a painting of transmogrification hiding a sketch of telekinesis. Many spells take time and devotion in order to be victorious. The rest was simply unsuccessful. Around the chamber's halo, a staircase guided. Princess Lola skipped around the spiral in hope of finding serendipity. Crossing paths of shelves and forsythia candles, she entered the hickory chamber. "Crimmy, what are you doing?" she asked. Queen Crimson settled near a purple desk ignited by the brightest menorah. Scrolls topped in ink spill procrastinated near the 7 candles. "Revising old spells. What are you doing?" Crimson asked, raising her staff, a wooden cane crowned with a minty gem. "Ooh, I was just looking for a ring I lost. Me and Magenta were playing hide and seek outside and Naya was counting, but I realized my ring wasn't on my finger, so Naya said we should look around the gardens. But it wasn't in there, so we went back into the castle and sent a whole team out to find it, but then we realized it was in my dresser all along." "I'm glad you found it. Then what brings you here?" Crimson asked, charging her staff so it illuminated a turquoise glimmer. "Since my ring was in my dresser, we went on to wonder how many other things we'd lost without knowing, so now we're having another search party for all those other things." "You wouldn't find anything in here. Out of all the times I've reshelled everything, nothing new ever comes up." "We still thought it was so funny. Before that, we went into town and got donuts from Mrs. Baker's bakery. I ate all 5 donuts in 6 minutes. That's my new record." "And?" "Naya said I shouldn't have done that, but Magenta thought it was impossible as she was full after 2. "Lola?" "I don't think I'll ever eat donuts again because I ate so many today." "Lola." "Do you think I should try s'mores instead?" "Lola!" Crimson interrupted, tone descending. Her staff's green crystal now flashed a bright red as she lifted her head from the scattered scrolls. "It doesn't have to be calculus." Confused at the retaliation, Lola halted. Crimson took this opportunity to finally begin what was never begun. However, after a few seconds of concentration, the silence diluted. "What's calculus?" "Enough!" Crimson flinched, brows leaning forth, eyes glowing white and scarlet lasers overtaking the room. In haste, Lola stepped back, the lasers barely touching her before they ceased. Taking deep breaths, Lola's eyes masked their tears. "I'm sorry," she choked, before making an exit within seconds. Although tempted to continue her spell, Crimson stepped back from the scrolls, taking a moment to process everything that had happened. She knew what she had done, but it ached her mind thinking of it. Looking back to the ever more interspersed scrolls that lay sleepless on her desk, she clubbed them to the ground and lowered her staff. She looked out toward the window. The sea and the sky looked down on her in disfavor. The breeze cringed and the sea thickened. As seagulls became aggressive and the salty taste turned bitter, the queen knew what she was doing was sweet and right. As she walked toward the riptide, the sand turned to knives under her Prussian boots, penetrating the leather. The longshore drift quickened as time went on with each step. She rose her staff up to the sun, following deep breaths as the prevailing wind grew stronger. She stepped back, then threw her staff into the ocean far from the seafoam teeth that engulfed the shore. She looked into the line where the ocean greeted the sky. as ripples ceased and her staff's bronze cane was no longer visible through transparent waves. The sea's order was satisfied. She had done it. A vow to never use magic again. "Crimson, may we speak?" Aaron asked as he approached her, the sun fluctuating in and out of the clouds, darkening the palace hall's every palpitating heartbeat. Nodding her head, she knew what he would ask. "Lola's been acting strange recently, very quiet and fidgety, which is abnormal behavior for her." "I haven't spoken to Lola since the other day," she stuttered. "I noticed. Is there any reason why you're not using your staff as much as before?" Aaron asked, almost cornering her to the milky column, grey by fog's sight. "How did you notice?" she asked. "I notice the little things in life when they're not there." Aaron moved back a bit, loosening the tension. "You don't have to tell me, only if you're comfortable." "All right. I may have used magic in anger." "What?" "It was folly, and I swear to never use magic again in fear of repeating the same mistake again." "All's fine. No physical harm was done." "What could have been fatality if I make the same mistake once more?" Aaron sighed, giving Crimson space. "Magic is your dream, future, destiny. You can't just abandon it like that. Lola wouldn't have wanted that." "Whether she does or not, I'm not bearing the thought of hurting her again." "But you had come so far. There's only a small chance of that happening." "And I'm not willing to take that risk." The weeks dragged by, lacking a certain sparkle. Crimson's throne felt like a tomb and a coffin was her bed. Lola had forgiven her, everything was all right, she repeated in her head, circling around the emotional cage. Yet, the thought of making the same mistake once more kept it forever locked. It had been 13 days since she had seen her precious staff, let alone held it. Something really was missing, although that something was for the best, she told herself. If only the days weren't so long, she'd not feel so sleepless. She'd still control magic's law and law in the kingdom, despite not using it herself. Sometimes a little difficult in terms of forgetting you're no longer telekinetic, and having to tediously move every individual scroll across your counter. Though her thoughts were ringing, she knew she'd get used to it. It wasn't until the 14th day, though, when things began to ascend. Upon popular demand and her own love and devotion for this practice, she had decided to retrieve her staff from the flood it now lay. It took hours worth of contemplation, each minute more agonizing than the last, but her final choice would bandage all the pain. Since her staff was drowned below the tides, it was difficult to obtain said relic. She'd sent many heralds out to danger and to dive to find her buried treasure, but all came back with gauntlets holding nothing. This quest was marked as the first failure of even the bravest and most accomplished of soldiers. Many travellers returned with nothing but sea salt, merchants with nothing more than they could sell, squires with nothing more than they could learn from, and farmers with nothing more than they could irrigate. Everyone had failed, from the youngest of peasants to the oldest of nobles. Even the wealthiest couldn't afford to take a dive so deep. As the last of the volunteers had departed after one final failure, Crimson laid forward upon her throne like time could freeze, until a group of sailors dispatched across the northern sea to find none other than a strange piece of wood bearing a glistening gem down at the bottom of the sea. Once they had returned, news of their discovery spread like spring seeds, though despite the knowledge's delight, there was question in the infectious air. Of all and sundry, who could ever reach a staff buried so deep? "You know, you could just go and retrieve it yourself," Centurion interrupted, the Cerulean king leaping upon the golden arm of Crimson's throne as he leaned into her. Crimson paused and raised her head. "If they couldn't reach it, how could I ever?" "Didn't you have a spell that could give you a tail? Can't you at least do some magic without your staff?" Centurion asked. "I could if I tried, but nothing compared to that. It's fine. It's not like I'm obliged to return to magic." Crimson sighed, Centurion crushed out of ideas. If there was trouble, Crimson could have just gotten the staff replaced. Though, It's impossible to replace something chemically and emotionally attached to you. You know what? I can do some magic without my staff. Naya could prepare some potions that would work in the same way a spell could. Somehow. So it was decided. Upon silent shore and cloudless dawn, the duo would return to sea. On midsummer waves and an awoken rock pool making way for transmogrification, the Queen stood, 4 bottles glistening in the ether's light, hiding their true fortune. All right. The purple potion we can use to turn into merpeople. Should we not succeed in finding the staff, the white one will turn us back. Crimson explained, handing Centurion a conspicuous bottle filled with violet liquor that Naya had prepared. As his last sip diminished, he was showered in sprinkles of saffron sparkles. His cobalt cape brushed aside his silver tunic, letting the glitter continue to his toe as his black boots evanesced and all that he adorned was a tail so soft and dolphin blue. As Crimson finished the second violet bottle, she was overtaken by the same golden glitter. Her raven hair was parted from the onyx lace that held it together in a bun as her hair dropped and washed her robes away into sapphire shells and a lapis tail decked in limpets. A very painting of a humpback whale. Once the transformations had performed, Crimson sat up on the rock. A soft drift carried her hair across her face and into her arm, signaling her not to rest. Ocean breeze, she sighed. You coming? Centurion asked, diving into the tide. Of course, Crimson disclosed as she followed in after him. The swim was sadistic and sorrowful, but it was all that was obliged to them. They swam what seemed like miles up north, finding nothing but colder waters. Having ice caps as their only treasure, they flipped the compass. We cannot go too far south. Any further and we'll be in Atlantis, Centurion stated. I'm willing to accept it could be there. If it was, they would have said so, right? Right. Can we rest? I was going to ask you the same thing, Centurion said, swimming down to a small reef cozy by the seabed. They said it was too deep down to reach. Surely we're still too high. Could have thought the same thing, Crimson said as she closed her eyes, hoping to see her staff, if not in a vision. Centurion looked around. Every distance looked to be in a blue haze, almost like being captive in a mirror. The crystallized reef, like a spectrum in the never-ending mist, housing fish of every colour hiding from the real predators that lurked beneath the silent fog. As the school swam by, Centurion scrutinized every scale of each fish until he noticed some misplaced wood left in their tracks. Your staff would float like any other piece of driftwood, right? It had fallen into water before and it never floated. Like that piece of driftwood? Crimson opened her lapis eyes and rose up. A solitary stick lay just before them, tangled between reefs and mangled in seaweed. Crimson held up the wood and shook off the aquatic elements. A grey jewel stared back from the head. Is that? 'Tis, she said, as the grey crystal fused into a minty gem. We found it, and it still works like it did. It's practically invincible and can never be destroyed. Who knows what could have happened if it were to fall into the wrong hands. Centurion watched as the mint crystal turned a deep cardinal red as Crimson embraced the staff. I always wondered why the crystal always changed colour. It changes depending on the mood of the user or the spell being used. Pink meaning shyness and purple, fear. What about orange? Orange tends to be excitement and yellow, joy. What does the colour mean now? This colour is associated with myself, in other words, just that. If, however, it beams a bright red, it means anger. More like run, Centurion joked. What did the green mean? That shade of green is the crystal's natural colour. However, a bright green suggests sickness or disgust. I'm guessing blue means sadness. What about black? Black means the crystal has come to dark magic. Grey, meaning no emotion, is very different though. What about white? White means the gem is broken. Oh. Is there a brown crystal? Not that I know of. What about a rainbow one? You ask too many questions. Crimson laughed as Centurion noticed the gem on her staff smiling a yellow gem. Let's return to shore now that we have what we came for. Through the staff's first spell since the flood, they returned to their home in the castle under the sun. With magic's return in the Queen's fortune, a vow was made to never make the same mistake again, on land or in sea. Despite the event, an apology was the most suited bandage. Though not all scars heal, many do hurt us no